Let's talk about captions. You have to write captions for every single photograph that you turn in as a part of a photo story in this class, meaning that you should really know how they work. So let's work over some basics on them before we get going. Now, before we really even launch into how to write them, let's get super picky. Let's get really pedantic for a minute. Some of you may have heard about them talked about as captions or cut lines. And so here's the actual real truth of the matter. Technically, the space that the words exist in is called the caption, and the words themselves are called the cut line. This is kind of a really old traditional way of talking about it in terms of designers talking about it in differences where they need to talk about the space different from the words. So for example, here, this is a photograph of a guy sitting down. The caption is technically the space underneath the photo. So the caption is the area actually laid out, whereas the cut line is the words, Jody Jones, a general manager at the Cracker Box in Fort Myers, entertains the crowd Friday evening by performing a medley of songs. So that is the cut line, whereas the space is the caption. Just know that, hey, if I call it a caption, I'm meaning kind of the terminology for the whole thing. I'm not trying to be lazy or anything. It's just that we all kind of collectively understand them as captions. And caption writing is even more important now than it ever has been before. Digital storage and archiving has made this incredibly important. The first big reason why it's even more important now is because images on the web, so when you post a story and you post an image with it and then you have the caption along with it, those photos can very easily lose context and get moved place to place in this very sort of social world. If a photograph is grabbed and moved to another blog or grabbed and used by someone else, even though if we don't necessarily want them to do that, they might, and in which case we want them to have the necessary information for it as well. And second, just internally, we have the ability now to have large scaled archives of photographs. A photograph you take and load into a server, either your own server or the server for a publication you work for, could be used at any point now into the future. And so you want it to be properly labeled, and oftentimes the caption is thrown in with the meta information for the photograph and is used for search terms and used for pulling that information back up later. So you're doing your future self a favor if you label your photos correctly and caption them correctly. So here is the basic structure for a caption. And if you follow this basic structure from now until the end of the semester, you will be doing a great job. And it's a really simple thing. As long as you can differentiate the use of two different sentences, you'll be great. The first sentence of a caption describes exactly what is going on in the photograph. Its whole purpose is to let the reader know exactly what they're looking at. It's also going to be in the present tense or the future tense as needed. You can very rarely use past tense in this first sentence, but they are very few and far between. So as long as you can remember that the first sentence describes what's going on in the photograph and is written in the present tense or future tense, you'll be good. Now, captions or cut lines are only 2 sentences long. So if this is our first sentence, then our second sentence brings up a deeper element of the story that you wouldn't know simply by looking at the photograph. So its purpose is to give context to what you're looking at, to provide some level of background information, of history, of data, of something that you can't get simply by looking at the photograph, but helps tell the story of what the photograph is. And also, linguistically, it should be in the past tense. So the first sentence is in present tense or future tense. The second sentence is in past tense. And that's it. Captions are only 2 sentences long and exist in this framework. The first sentence tells you exactly what's in the photograph in present tense. The second sentence tells you some other greater, deeper piece of information in past tense. So let's look at some examples here of some good captions written for some interesting photographs. I pulled these from a photo story of some guys in South Africa who do dirt bike oval racing, which is a very weird and dangerous sport. And so here we have a photograph of a guy going around a corner on a dirt bike. Nice cloud of dust kicked up behind him. Kind of an interesting photograph. But the purpose of it is the caption, which says, Speedway racer Neil Pettit power slides his motorbike into the corner during a race at the Walkerville Dirt Oval south of Johannesburg, South Africa on August 28th, period. Notice what this first sentence is doing. It is describing exactly what was going on in the photograph. It is describing that a guy on his motorcycle was power sliding into a corner. And notice it provides all of the needed details and information with it as well. So we have the person's name, Neil Pettit. We have the exact specifications of what they were doing. It wasn't just going into a corner. It was power sliding his motorbike into a corner. Notice that we have the specifics of where it's taking place, the Walkerville Dirt Oval, south of Johannesburg, South Africa. And we have a date. We have August 28th. Now, one trick here you'll notice is that the first sentence of this caption sounds a whole lot like a basic summary news lead. It sounds a lot like it's answering the basic who, what, when, and where. And that's because it is answering the basic who, what, when, and where. It's just taking the form of a description as opposed to a pure news lead. Now, the second sentence of our caption. Speedway racing sees 4 to 6 racers riding against each other around an oval dirt racetrack on motorbikes that don't have brakes or gears. That's kind of the reason why it's so dangerous. But notice that this sentence, while interesting and compelling and tells you a little bit more about what you are looking at, doesn't describe anything that's going on. It's a description about what dirt bike racing is, at least in around an oval track. You wouldn't know that simply by looking at that photograph. What it's doing is taking the information from the first sentence and detailing it out a little bit more so that you get a deeper sense of context. So let's look at a second example. Here's our racer. He's got his helmet pulled up. He's enjoying a cigarette. He's sort of dirty from going around the dirt track a bunch. The background is nice and out of focus. It's a nice little profile shot of this guy. And the caption that would go along with this, and I'm using this as an example as well because sometimes you're not going to have a lot of action to describe. The first one you had the advantage of describing someone power sliding into a corner. What do you do if it's just someone enjoying a cigarette? Well, you describe what they're doing. Mario Vander Merwe, I'm going to guess is how you say that, smokes a cigarette prior to his Speedway heat at the Walkerville Dirt Oval. So again, that's what you're doing, is you're describing exactly what is happening in the photograph. It is a person smoking a cigarette at this place, and this doesn't include a date. It was sort of included in the first one, but notice we have a full name, we have detail about what they're doing, and we have the where, the Walkerville Dirt Oval. The second sentence, the newly formed Stof sees normal motorbike racers taking to the dirt oval racetrack to race against each other in different categories. You wouldn't know that simply by looking at the photograph, so it is giving you some sort of deeper fact, some sort of deeper piece of information. This shot, a nice detail shot, if we're looking at this in terms of a photo story. This is someone's tank with good luck written on it in some sort of marker. And the caption, an old Yamaha has good luck painted on the tank at the Walkerville Dirt Oval for the first race of the Stof race day south of Johannesburg on August 6th. Notice that this has got the specifics of the details needed for it. It talks about the type of motorcycle it is, that it is good luck painted on the tank. It's got the where, Walkerville Dirt Oval. It's got the why, the first race at the Stof race day. And it's got the when, August 6th. So this is going, again, sort of like a lead in describing exactly what you're looking at in the photograph. And then the second sentence, although there were small prizes, the racing was about having fun, beating your mates, and getting a face full of dirt. Now, some of you may be asking yourself at this point, where do you get the information for the second sentence? And the answer is you kind of have to be a reporter. So while you're out in the world taking these pictures and snapping all of these wonderful shots and talking to people to get their detailed first and last names and anything like that you would need for the first sentence, ask people, like a reporter, some of their thoughts on things. Ask them for some background details. Ask them for as much information as you can, so that when you get to the point that you can start putting together your captions, you have information to use for the second sentence. One of the last examples here to look at, this is from a sidecar race, which is one of the most bonkers things that exists in the world of motorcycle racing. It is motorcycles that race with sidecars on them, and it is kind of nuts. And the caption, a sidecar racer hangs off the side of the sidecar motorbike as his friend rides the bike around the Walkerville Dirt Oval. It is just a pure description of what is happening in the photograph. And then the supporting information, the second sentence, sidecar racing is very dangerous as the passenger needs to hang off the bike to keep it stable. If you ever want a fun time, go to YouTube and look at sidecar dirt racing. It is absolutely nuts. And our very last example, a nice photograph, just technically a good example of using slower speed, shutter and aperture to get a little bit of a blur, gives a sense of speed, a sense of action. This does kind of break rule of thirds because the photograph has the subject dead in the center, but sometimes that's okay. And our final example here for a caption: Andrew Wessels races his Ducati Scrambler during the Stof Cup race meeting at the Walkerville Dirt Oval. Period. Notice that this is we haven't talked about the grammar part up to this point. Notice that the first sentence is in present tense. It is describing exactly what is going on in the photograph in present tense. Andrew Wessels races his Ducati Scrambler. And then the second sentence, Wessels at 63 was one of the oldest competitors. Competitors is spelled funny here because I was stealing this from a South African photojournalist who spells things differently, I guess, in South Africa. Notice that this sentence is in past tense. Wessels at 63 was one of the oldest competitors. That can seem a little bit weird because we've always been told in the entire history of writing that you don't change tenses in the middle of a paragraph. But in this case, because you're doing photo captions, you have to. Wessels races his Ducati, that is present tense. Wessels was one of the oldest competitors, that's past tense. And this is how you write captions. This is a basic structure. As long as you can remember that the first sentence describes what's going on in the photograph and does it in present tense, and that the second sentence gives a deeper sense of the story and does it in past tense, you will be all right. And I look forward to reading the captions you write for your stories.